compound inequalities. So compound is like a compound sentence. You know what a compound sentence is in English? Similar. Pretty much the exact same thing. It says a compound inequality is when two inequalities are combined into one statement. We use the words and or when we're talking about compound inequalities. Now, I know this seems a little odd, but first thing we need to do is discuss the difference between and or. It says let's discuss the difference between the two. So the difference between and or. That's a good word to use for it too. T-O-O-2. Also, both of them, right? Or is one or the other. Here's a good way to think of it. It says, think about the following statement. Everyone, and you don't have to do this, just think about it. Everyone that is a boy and 15 years old. If I ask you to raise your hand, think about who would raise their hands. They have to meet both qualifications. They'd have to be a boy and they would have to be 15 years old. Make sense? If I said everyone that is a boy or 15 years old, raise your hand. What's different between those two? And that's it. On the second one, either one could raise their hand. So on the second one, would you have some girls raising their hand? Sure. The girl that's 15 years old would raise their hand, and any boy, no matter what their age, would raise their hand. So if you're just a boy, period, or you're 15 years old, in the second one, you'd raise your hand. With a Venn diagram, let me explain what this would look like, and Venn diagrams are actually very important to me right now. I'm taking nearly an entire class that's based on ands and ors and all this. So you've got all the boys. Imagine all the boys were in this circle here. All the 15-year-old people were in the circle here. So the people that were in the middle, the overlap, that's your and. That's the people that are 15 years old and boys. What would this out here be? That would be boys and what? Who would be located? If you think that you would be located here, raise your hand. How old are you? 14. So he would be located here. Does that make sense? How old are you? 14. You'd be here. How old? 14. These are the boys and 14 years old. Boys that are 16 years old. Anybody that's not 15 years old, and the boy would be located here. Okay, again, in the middle, I said that's all the boys that were 15 years old. Who would be located here? 15-year-old boys are here. These people out here would be 15-year-old girls. Makes sense? Do you see how to read a Venn diagram? So the ands are in the middle. The ors are the whole thing put together. You've got boys that... Okay, come in. You got boys that are not 15 years old, you got boys that are 15 years old, and you got girls that are 15 years old are included in the big group. But scrolling on down. It says in an and sentence, both statements must be true. It is the intersection of the two groups, the middle. In an or statement, either statement can be true. It is the union of the two groups, both groups put together. Example 1 says, Alan bought an aquarium and some fish at a pet store. He was told that his fish required water with at least 6, but no more than 10 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. That's how much oxygen should be in this water. At least 6, but no more than 10. Well, maybe it was. Example 1 says Alan bought an aquarium and some fish at a pet store. He was told that this fish required water with at least 6, but no more than 10 parts per million of dissolved oxygen. Write and graph a compound inequality that describes the situation. First off, let's read this statement and think about, is this an and statement or an or statement? It's going to be one or the other. It says his fish requires at least 6, no more than 10. Okay, at least 6, but no more than 10. Is there two different options of what he could give his fish there? Is that an or? It has to be at least 6. What does at least 6 mean? Over 6 or 6, right? Can it be less than 6? At least 6. Can that be less than 6? No, it has to be more than 6. What about the no more than 10? What does that mean? It can't go over 10. So does that read for me then what we've just discussed? It has to be at least 6. It has to be more than 6 or less than 10. Think about it. It has to be greater than 6, correct? It's an and. This has to be bigger than 6, and it has to be less than 10, because if I said or, greater than 6, that means it could be 15, right? But what's the problem there? It has to be less than 10 also. It has to be greater than 6, and it has to be less than 10. Makes sense. It says, and let me show you how to write that. The amount of oxygen, which we'll call it X. X has to be greater than or equal to 6, and X has to be less than or equal to 10. Because it's nasty, I'm just highlighting it. So if this is 6 and this is 10, okay, let's talk about what the graph of this is going to look like. This part is very important, guys. We're going to use this the rest of this chapter, so watch closely, make sure you understand it. Greater than 6 and less than 10. Give me some numbers that satisfy that. 7, 8, 9. What about 10? 10. What about 6? So 6 through 10. What about 11? Why does 11 not satisfy? Because it also has to be less than 10. So make sure it makes sense why it's an and statement now. It has to be greater than 6, and it also has to be less than 10. It has to satisfy both. That's an and. So here's how you would graph it. Solid circle, and you can shade the middle, or this is what I do. I just do the little thing above it. All the things between 6 and 10. Could it be 6.5? Could it be 6.1? 9.9? 10.1? No. Good job. All things between 6 and 10. Next. That's how you would solve that, yes. We're leading up to actually solving the equations. Or inequalities, I shouldn't say equations. Example 2. On a certain highway, it is illegal for a car to drive less than 45 or more than 65 miles per hour. Is that an and or an or statement? It's or. Right there's or. Right? It is illegal to drive less than 45 or greater than 65. It says, write and graph a compound inequality to describe the speeds that are prohibited. The speeds that are prohibited, we'll call it S. S is less than 45 is prohibited, or S is greater than, 65. Those are the speeds that are prohibited. Let's graph that. Good. Perfect. 45 down, S is less than 45. Did it say less than or equal to? On a certain highway, it is illegal to drive a car less than 45. So anything less than 45 is illegal. Makes sense. That's illegal. You can't drive any of those speeds. Give me some things that are included in those speeds. 35, 40, 45. Can you drive 45? Yeah. Why can you drive 45? Because you can't go less than that. It has an open circle. We can do 45. We can also do 65. That's not prohibited, but all things greater than 65 are. So that is, S is less than 45 or S is greater than 65. Makes sense. What if I asked you to graph the speeds that were allowed? Could you tell me if that's an and or an or statement? That's an and statement. Because what speeds are allowed? S is greater than 45, and S is less than or equal to 65, which would be, let me do it in a different color. This would actually be the speeds that were allowed. Those are called complements of each other. That's extra information. You don't need to know that. But if you put the two together, you get all speeds. It's either allowed or not allowed. 46, good job, up to 63, 64, and 65. Here we go. The next part, example 3. We're taking the word problems. It's odd that we start out with the word problems, but they're pretty easy, not nearly as bad. Going down to example 3, we're taking the words out of it. It says, graph the following inequalities. Q is less than 5 or Q is greater than 16. Q is less than 5 or Q is greater than 16. It satisfies one or the other. Give me some numbers that satisfy this. Anybody? Okay, does 6. Q is less than 5. Does it satisfy that one? 4, 3, 2, 1 satisfy this one. Or Q could be greater than 16. 17, 18, 19, 20. Makes sense. Your numbers that satisfy this is 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and on down. Or, makes sense where the or comes into play, the numbers 17, 18, 19, 20. Let's graph that. Do what? It is. Yeah, it is. Except for you just got, if you've got an or, you just graph them both. If it's got an and, you actually graph where they overlap, the intersection of the two. So Q is less than 15. Open or close circle? Open circle shaded to the left. That's all the numbers less than 5. Or Q could be the numbers greater than 16, which is an open circle shaded to the right. If it's an and, you would connect them. It would be the middle stuff. That's it. So what are some numbers that are not included? Look at your graph. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. All those numbers in the middle are not included. Questions? Bless you. And is together.